Good morning from Bangkok to everyone joining in from across Asia and the Pacific and beyond. So we're still waiting for participants to come into the room, and we will be starting in about a minute. Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to this event. Now, ahead of the World Environment Day this Thursday, we are pleased to welcome you to the regional launch of UN Women's Guidance Note on Integrating Climate Change, International Action Plans for Women, Peace and Security, with a focus on Asia and the Pacific. My name is Nurul Rashid, and I'm the Regional Policy Advisor on Governance, Peace and Security for Asia and the Pacific UN Women. Now, I have the pleasure of guiding you through the next hour, which will be indeed very exciting. So let me take you through a few practical notes before we dive in. So today's session is being recorded and will be made available on the UN Women Asia Pacific website as well as on YouTube. Now, we are simultaneously streaming on YouTube, and closed captioning is enabled. So please click on the CC button on your screen if you need captioning. Feel free to greet colleagues in the chat window, but for questions to the speakers, please use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. Now, you can also upvote other participants' questions. That helps us prioritize the most popular ones during the Q&A segment. So our team may answer some questions in writing or respond if there is time. Please also include your email address when submitting your question in case we run out of time and are unable to hold the Q&A session during the event. We will follow up with you with responses afterwards whenever possible. On social media, please join the conversation on social media using the hashtags Women, Peace, Security and with WPS at 25. Just also a kind reminder, please keep the chat respectful and on topic. Please note that any destructive behavior will result in removal from this event. So with those logistics covered, let's begin. Now, climate change is no longer a distant concern and is impacting on the lives of people globally, in particular the most vulnerable living in difficult situations. The UN has increasingly engaged in climate-specific or climate-sensitive approaches in our support to member states. At UN Women's Regional Office, we've recognized that this means breaking down siloed approaches, bringing climate change into our gender equality work, and bringing gender-sensitive responses into climate action. The guidance note we are launching today is a testament to UN Women's commitment to offer practical ways to embed climate resilience into women, peace, and security efforts across the region. The guided note is also made possible with the general support of our partner, the Australian government. I would like now to introduce our speakers. Joining us for the launch today are Doug Platson. He is the Director of the Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion Multilateral Section at the Gender Equality Branch of Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We also have Christine Arab, our UN Women Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. Assistant Secretary Susana Guadalupe Majeda, who is the Executive Director at the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation and Unity from the Philippines government. Sharon Bagwan Rose, who is the Network Coordinator of Pacific Women Mediators Network. And Lucas Routinho, who is the Senior Advisor on Environmental and Climate Change, climate security at Delphi. And our colleague, Jaffe Achel, who is the Climate Peace and Security Specialist at UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. So I'm going to hand over now to Dirk, who could I please invite you for your opening remarks? Thank you very much, Dirk.
Thank you so much, Nurul, and welcome everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you to UN Women, not only for providing yet another fabulous guidance note that is going to, I believe, prove very, very useful for practitioners, governments, and NGOs that are dealing with the subject of integrating climate change into women, peace, and security activities in general, but also particularly into the national action plans. So I'm not going to tell you anything new here, but we obviously all know that gender equality is essential for ending poverty, achieving peace, responding to the climate crisis, and building a sustainable and equitable future for all. Gender equality and climate action can work together to mutually reinforce and increase progress. And I think that is really one of the key messages that is really important to continuously repeat. The relationship between climate change and peace and security in particular is becoming clearer and clearer, and sadly enough, we observe it time and time again. That is particularly relevant in fragile and conflict-afflicted contexts, where the competition over natural resources, insecure livelihoods, mass displacements increase the risk of social tension and instability. And we all know that with worsening climate change and increasing impacts, that situation is just going to arise more and more often. And at the same time, we also know that conflict and insecurity affect people's ability to deal with climate change impacts and to prepare and respond to climate risks. And that is particularly true for women and girls and minorities in other situations, and is something that needs urgently to be addressed. Now, luckily enough, we all also know that women and girls play a fundamental role as leaders and agents of change. And that is true for a number of areas, including the economic activities and others, but also in particular in responding to climate change. They're often at the forefront in their communities in building solutions for adaptation and mitigation of climate change, biodiversity loss, and also in reducing disaster risks. So that means for us as a donor that we need to ensure that women-led organizations in climate-impacted countries receive direct funding to continue their vital work. On the other hand, green growth can also open up opportunities, economic opportunities for women's employment in emerging low-carbon economies. And women entrepreneurs can foster innovation and competition for climate adaptation and mitigation. And to lastly, probably mention one of the things that we are doing across our development program to ensure that this going together of climate change and gender equality is embedded. Our international development policy has introduced first of all, ambitious agenda for the integration of gender equality and climate change. And it sets out dual requirements for investments valued at 3 million and above to address both gender equality and climate change. And so that means that those investments now must include gender equality objectives in line with the OECD DAC gender equality policy marker, but also need to have climate change objectives with a goal for us to reach 80% of our investments by 28-29 in line again with the OECD DAC markers for climate change. So I hope that these remarks provide at least a little bit of a framing from the Australian government's perspective. And I'm very sorry about the helicopter that's hovering around here now. It's got nothing to do with me, I promise you. But I hope that there's going to be a fruitful discussion. I think the guidance note, as I said before, is an extremely valuable contribution to the discussion and to the implementation of these really critical topics. So I thank you again for the invitation and looking forward to the meeting.
Thank you so much, Dirk, for those insightful remarks and for sharing Australia's position on this issue as well. I would like now to invite our Regional Director, Ms. Christine Arap, for her remarks. Christine.
Thank you so much, Nurul, and thank you, Dirk. I actually thought it was one of those beautiful birds you see in Canberra rather than a helicopter. I'd like to, on behalf of UN Women, welcome you all to the launch of UN Women's Guidance Note on Integrating Climate Change in the WPS National Action Plans. And I want to thank you for your participation. There's not many tools available that show the intersectionality and inherent link between climate change and the WPS agenda. So I really appreciate hearing and being able to participate with you all today and learn a bit more about what you're doing. I want to start by thanking Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for their generous partnership and support throughout this process. It's made this guidance note and today's discussions possible. I also want to acknowledge a key contribution that Sweden's Development Cooperation, SIDA, has played for continuing to support our global work on WPS and ensuring that expertise on climate, peace, and security comes together as well. It is essential for the member states to continue bringing these agendas together. So I really want to recognize the key roles that Australia has played in particular here, and also Sweden as well. And thank you. The UN Secretary General has called climate change a threat and a risk multiplier and stressed the urgent need to examine this through a gender lens. And this message has resonated across regions and in international fora, but probably no more so than the Asia-Pacific region. In 2023, the ASEAN-UN Dialogue on Climate, Peace and Security recommended leveraging the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on WPS to explore these linkages, especially their impact on women, alongside member states' national action plans. At COP28, the CRRP declaration recognized how climate change, conflict, and crisis disproportionately affect women, youth, displaced people, indigenous groups, and persons with disabilities. Globally, 80% of climate-displaced people are women and girls, and during disasters, women and children are often much more likely to die, largely due to lower access to information, less mobility, and less decision-making power at the time of the events. Women leaders and organizations in Asia and the Pacific are not just victims of climate impacts. They are offering solutions grounded in local knowledge and community trust and peace-building experience. In the Pacific, a woman CSO is helping communities manage tensions caused by climate relocation. In Nepal, women's networks are leading on forest management and resolving disputes over illegal logging. We'll hear more examples today from across the region. But despite these vital roles, women are still left on the margins when it comes to key spaces where decision-making around climate and peace building is made. UN Women's recent global survey found that 90% of women's organizations in crisis settings have faced cuts in foreign aid due to the recent downturn of ODA. And only 56 out of 163 aid activities in 2021 focused on climate, gender, and security as a primary objective. Now that's quite a shocking statistics. 56 activities out of 160,000. And which is less, it's a 0.035%. The Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund's Climate, Peace and Security window is a promising exception and deserves more to reach more crises and more women, more support to reach more crises and more women. Governments, often with UN Women's support, are developing and implementing the WPS National Action Plans to turn global resolutions into national policies, budgets, and change. And we're very pleased today to learn more from the Philippines, who has to be one of the world leaders in its commitment to WPS National Action Plans and their progressive evolutions. Today, over 113 countries have adopted NAPs, including 11 in Asia and in the Pacific. Importantly, over 40% of these now address climate change. As one of the world's most climate-effective regions, Asia-Pacific urgently needs integrated solutions that link peace, rights, women, and development. And that's why, with the support of the Australian government, UN Women has produced the first ever guidance note on integrating climate change into the WPS NAPs. It offers clear and practical recommendations for governments and civil society and all partners. And we try to draw on as many global experiences as possible, using the support of our other regional offices and country presences worldwide. While climate change is disruptive, it also gives us the chance to rethink peace and security, to invest in resilience, and to put women's leadership at the heart of inclusive and sustainable solutions. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to hearing your experiences and thoughts today.
Thank you so much, Christine. So we now turn to the guidance note. So to help us highlight the essentials of the guidance note and why this guidance was created, I would like to invite my colleague, Jaffe Achel, to run us through the guidance note. Jaffe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Noel. Let me just quickly share my screen. Here we go. So my name is Jaffet, and I have the pleasure of diving into this guiding note, which UN Women has developed. The guidance note is titled Integrating Climate Change into National Action Plans for Women, Peace, Security, and is a practical tool for stakeholders working on both peace and security, gender equality, and climate change in its broadest sense. So it's really bringing everybody together. The guidance note is based on experiences and lessons through consultations that the colleagues here at UN Women's regional office have made with relevant actors such as government, NGOs, donors, civil society, youth groups, and academia. But firstly, before diving in, I would like to acknowledge and commend all the women peace builders, environmental, human rights defenders, and grassroots organizations who every day lead both climate adaptation and peace building work in their communities. And to show you an example, I would like to take you to a country on a mental journey, a country in the region which is vulnerable to climate change. In this country, imagine a young woman named Nayana, and each monsoon season, her village is flooded to a point where it destroys livelihoods. When the men then migrate to cities for work, Nayana stays behind, walking for longer water and exposing herself to a gender-based violence along the way. She leads quiet negotiations between neighbors over land use when fields flood, and based on generations of environmental knowledge from her grandmother, she helps decide how to share limited water resources. But when recovery planning begins, she's never invited to the meetings. Her insights, crucial for building both peace and climate resilience, they go unheard. Not always by default, but often by design. So why do we have designs that leave Nayana out? Although Nayana's story might be fictional, the examples are very real, and the story shows a bigger policy failure. Because when women's lived experience is left out, peace and climate plans lose their relevance, their impact, and their value. Today's launch is about changing that. It's about making the link between climate peace security and women peace and security real by using them as practical tools to build resilience and inclusion. Nayana's story, therefore, really shows how climate peace and security and women peace security converge. And as risks and opportunities arise if we pay close attention. The guidance note therefore spells out why and how the climate peace agenda and WPS agenda can converge. I would like to briefly touch on the climate peace security agenda as it might be something new for colleagues on the call. And the climate peace security is also under different names, for example, climate security, environmental security, and environmental peace building. But the agenda is not about proving that climate change causes conflicts. It's about expanding our understanding of the root causes of insecurity and conflict, and really looking at how climate change pushed these factors. And you'll find climate peace security language both in the Security Council, in ASEAN forums, and even in communities, although they don't use the exact climate peace security language as we do today. A place where we're seeing a slight convergence is at COP, as mentioned by our regional director, where the COP28 Climate Relief and Recovery Peace Declaration, or CCRP, really stands out. It speaks to increased investment and more money going to women in places hit by both conflict and climate change. I know a lot of you already know the WPS agenda, but I'd like to highlight how it's based on UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and also how it promotes gender equality. And it's about human rights rooted in communities and focuses on making invisible voices and experiences visible. And this is important because the climate peace security has actually lent a lot of advocacy work of WPS agenda to really advocate for the climate peace security agenda. The guidance note is therefore one of the first guidance notes which spells out why climate peace security and women peace security must converge, and 4 distinct reasons why you can see on the screen. The first one is because women's leadership is already a reality, it's not a potential, and both agendas really recognize that. Secondly, it really looks at non-inclusive power structures and how it causes harm, especially as we see climate change being interlinked with conflict risks, but also increases gender-based violence, displacement, and inequality. Thirdly, both agendas also question whose security it is we're prioritizing. And both climate peace security and women peace security looks at who bears the consequences of both conflict and climate change, and that inclusion is really the way forward. And lastly, women peace security is the solution to many climate peace security issues, especially because at the heart of climate peace security, security is the concern, but the responses and the solutions should not be harnessed in hard security or militarized solutions. So the women peace security's approach to non-militarized responses is actually the right way to conduct climate peace and security work. I know many of you already work across the 4 pillars of women peace security, but it's just to say that climate change will and is already disrupting your work throughout the 4 pillars. And that's why, again, the convergence between climate change and women peace security is so important. So when you work on these 4 pillars, ask yourself, how will climate change impact my work? But also, how can women play a role in mitigating climate-induced risks? One key aspect of the Women Peace Security Agenda are the National Action Plans. And they're important because they're government-owned frameworks, and they really are harnessed in inclusion, all the way from consultations to reporting. And currently, there are 113 apps, and as the region director said, 40% now include climate change. And this note has the ambition to raise that number by providing practical tools for everybody working on Women Peace Security National Action Plans. I think we're all acutely aware of the threats climate change poses to regions across the world, and especially in Asia Pacific. But today's conversation could also focus on the opportunities that climate change gives us, especially because climate change forces us to change the way we perceive and address climate peace and security. For example, if we go back to Nayana's story, she's not a bystander, she's a leader. Her quiet authority, decision-making in crisis, and stewardship of natural resources represent the kind of women's leadership that is chronically unrecognized in formal systems. Climate change, therefore, pulls away the curtain and reveals Nayana's work to us. And this guidance note helps national action plans finally catch up with that reality. So if I should really conclude everything in what this guidance note is about, it's about strengthening government's responses to conflict by recognizing that they can do better peace and security work if they recognize that climate change will have different impacts on men and women, but also that both men and women have a role to play in mitigating risks. So why should you use the guidance note? I mean, there are many great examples and very practical steps for how you could address both climate peace security and women peace security, but you should really use it because it's a tool for you in your daily work. It's the first UN note to deliberately link climate change and women peace security, but also it's based on lessons learned and existing work. You should also use this guidance note because climate change is already happening. And by using national action plans, you can actually converge both conflict prevention and climate adaptation in one framework. But also because we've seen all around the world that climate change amplifies the risks that women peace security seeks to address. So all the work you're trying to do, climate change disrupts it, which is why you should include it in your work. And lastly, to the climate peace security practitioners out there, national action plans are also a good way to harness your climate peace security work, both because of the women peace security's non-militarized approach, but also because national action plans already has a lot of inclusion elements that is good for climate peace security work. So lastly, it works for you in a practical way, both because it outlines existing security, peace and security and climate change frameworks, which not many guidance notes do at all. They often have them in silos, and this is a note which brings it together. It also maps out practical entry points to include climate change in your work. And lastly, it also spells out responsibilities and roles for stakeholders, which I'll briefly touch about in a minute. This is just a bit as an appetizer because I would call all of you to dive deeper into the guidance notes to see some of the excellent case studies that we have proposed as entry points. But in the Philippines, for example, which we'll hear a bit more about by the Honorary Assistant Secretary, in the Philippines, they've included climate change across their 4 WPS pillars, exactly because of the reasons I just explained. In Uganda, they combine top-level down policy frameworks and ensure local implementation and ownership. In Latin America and the Caribbean, they're a bit ahead of the curve in terms of looking at climate peace security in national action plans through the protection of women environmental human rights defenders who are our custodians of environment, but also of peace. And in Indonesia, the national action plans ensures full coordination between the local governance and the policy level, but also focuses on rural populations who are often very much hit by climate change. And a word of notice also the ASEAN WPS regional plan, which has and acknowledges the integration of climate change into its women peace security work. So 4 takeaways I would like for you to bring forward and remember after this launch is that the first one is that the future is now. There's no reason to wait around to see the impacts of climate change. They're already reshaping our peace and security work. Nothing is new for women, especially as they're already leading climate peace, climate resilience and peace building work in communities. The guidance note also avoids duplication as it speaks about things which are already going on. And lastly, it's all about prevention. And by including climate change in your national action plans, you're actually able to both do climate resilience, but also conflict prevention work under a gender-sensitive lens. And to bring it all, the guidance note also calls for intersectionality. And what that means is that it ensures women in all their diversity must be actively engaged and involved in shaping their own solutions, not just subjects of their impacts. And while this slide just remains on the screen, you can have a look at what roles and responsibilities the guidance notes calls you out to do as a different stakeholder. But one main thing is that the guidance notes calls for actors to come together under the guidance of climate peace security and women peace security. So stakeholders responsible for gender equality will now be able to speak to peace and security actors who speak with climate change actors, which is something which hasn't really been done before. So lastly, if we go back to Nayana, she's one of the examples of women who are already holding their communities together through crisis. And this guidance knows it's about making sure women's knowledge and leadership really shape our national responses through these national action plans. Because peace and resilience cannot be built without the inclusion of women, but also that the inclusion will strengthen government's responses to the benefits of all in society. So this should serve as a little appetizer for diving into the guidance note, and I'm happy to see so many join today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaffe. And please do have a look at the guidance note. And Jaffe is available right now for any questions that you may have. You may reflect that in the Q&A box. It is now my pleasure to welcome Assistant Secretary Susana Guadalupe Maqueda. She is unfortunately unable to join us in person, but she has kindly shared a video presentation, which we will be playing for you now. Now, the Philippines is highlighted in the guidance note as a best practice in integrating climate change into a national action plan. So we will now play the video from Susana.
Good morning, distinguished colleagues. On behalf of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, and the 26-member Philippine National Steering Committee on WPS, we would like to extend our appreciation for this opportunity to contribute to the conversation on integrating climate change into National Action Plan on WPS. Let me walk you through the main topics we'll be exploring today. First is the importance of integrating climate risks into the Philippine NAP, how the NAP reflects climate justice and disaster risk reduction, lessons from the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region from Muslim Mindanao on multi-level coordination, a call for global action, and finally, the importance of centering inclusion in achieving climate justice. Let's begin with the story, one of resilience, identity, and transformation. Jean Golong is a trans woman leader from Tacloban City, one of the hardest hit areas during Super Typhoon Yolanda, or Haiyan. She survived the floodwaters by clinging to a tree, only to face discrimination when seeking aid. Forced to use her birth name to access relief. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a painful reminder of how climate crises amplify existing inequalities. But Jean's story didn't end in victimhood. She became an activist, a voice for queer inclusion in climate justice, testifying before the Commission on Human Rights. Her story reminds us, climate crisis is not just environmental, it is deeply human, deeply intersectional. In 2024 alone, 6 typhoons displaced over 13 million people of the Philippines. As our First Lady emphasized at the World Government Summit of 2025, the Philippines is ranked the most at-risk country globally for 3 consecutive years. This is according to the World Risk Index. Climate change is not tomorrow's threat, it is today's reality, especially for those already at the margins. Jean's experience shows why climate justice must be integral to our WPS agenda. The Philippines has committed to a 75% GHG emissions reduction by 2030 and an adaptation plan rooted in inclusivity. But true resilience requires that no one is left behind. The 10-year Philippine NAP integrates climate justice and disaster risk reduction across all 4 pillars. It began with a contextualization workshop co-organized by OPAPRO and UN Women. Experts like Professor Rufa Giam and Dr. Angela Zafra emphasized that climate risks intersect with gender, conflict, and exclusion, especially in vulnerable regions like the Bangsamoro. In Pillar 1, we commit to women's leadership in crisis management. Midterm Outcome 1.3 tracks the percentage of women trained leading crisis response efforts. Pillar 2 calls for WPS mainstreaming in environmental governance and DRRM, placing gender at the core of humanitarian response. Pillar 3 deepens this through integration in gender and development plans, governance, and DRRM, aligned with the ASEAN Gender Outlook, which warns that inaction could push over 500,000 Filipinos, mostly women and girls, into poverty by 2030. Finally, Pillar 4 emphasizes gender-sensitive meal systems, capturing grassroots women's voices through impact stories. This comprehensive integration ensures that our NAP is not just a document, but a living, inclusive roadmap to resilience. The Bangsamoro Regional Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security offers a strong model. Ministries like Environment, Natural Resources and Energy, the Ministry of the Interior and Local Government, and the Bangsamoro Women Commission co-develop strategies informed by Moro and Indigenous women's consultations. Today, women-led DRRM committees in BARM apply gender-sensitive evacuation protocols. Even in emergencies, dignity and inclusion are non-negotiable. Climate change knows no borders. Our experience offers key lessons for other states. First, let's conduct intersectional risk assessments that reflect gender-diverse identities. Institutionalize climate WPS co-ownership between ministries. Use gendered indicators. Countries like Pakistan, Cambodia, and Nigeria have shown what's possible. with gender-based violence helplines in disaster response, gender quotas in infrastructure, and land rights programs for women. Locally, the Resilient Livelihoods Development Initiative for Women and Youth IDPs in Maguindanao, co-implemented by UNFPA and FAO, demonstrates the power of inclusive implementation. As we confront our interconnected challenges, we must move from words to action. First, plan with communities, not just for them. Inclusion begins with listening. Second, build household resilience. Empower women, men, the elderly, LGBTQ plus persons, and PWDs to become first responders and agents of early warning. Third, design inclusive safety nets for farmers, fisher folks, and vulnerable sectors. Fourth, invest in duty bearers education, from barangay leaders to DRRM officials, on the links between climate, gender, and security. Fifth, honor indigenous knowledge systems. Their wisdom on land, water, and biodiversity is key to sustainability. And finally, remember, peace and security are indivisible. They are not privileges, they are rights. Let us build a world where resilience does not exclude and where security uplifts every voice. Jean's journey from survivor to advocate embodies the heart of our NAP, a commitment to ensuring that women in all their diverse and intersecting identities are seen, heard, and empowered. The fight for climate justice is the fight for inclusive peace. Let us act with urgency, compassion, and courage so that no one is left behind. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much to the government of the Philippines for sharing their perspectives and experiences in their National Action Plan. I would like now to invite Sharon Bagon-Rolls, who is joining us late in the afternoon in Fiji. Sharon, can you please share your experiences from the Pacific? In particular, how are women and women's organizations driving peace and climate resilience in the Pacific? Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Norrell, and thank you for the opportunity, and greetings on behalf of the Pacific Women Mediators Network. I'll discuss the significance of women-led mediator networks and civil society-led peace-building networks in conflict prevention, resolution, and human security, which includes climate security. Now, as we all know, well before the adoption of UNSCR 1325, Pacific Island peace builders were pivotal in addressing violence and mediating conflicts, often at great personal risk, by organizing peace activities, working for the realization of human rights and social, economic, ecological, and climate justice. And this is reflected in the Pacific Regional Action Plan on WPS, and further endorsed at the head of state level by the 52nd meeting of Pacific Forum leaders, with a specific reference in the revitalized Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration, as well as the implementation strategy of the peace and security pillars of the 2050 strategy of the Blue Pacific continent. This is a very large framework for, that's working across all our Pacific Island Forum countries. And what it says in that particular strategy is about ensuring, and I quote, the full, equal, effective, and meaningful leadership and participation of women and girls in all their diversity at every stage of peace processes, conflict prevention, resolution, and peace building for peace and security. Now, this comes following the 2018 BOE Declaration, where Pacific Forum leaders, reaffirmed the human security approach and talked about climate change as the single biggest risk and threat to our Pacific Island region. Our Women Mediators Network aims to enhance all of these accountabilities for equality and peace, drawing from our legacy of peace building and activism, across the Pacific Island region. We are focusing on the much needed institutional reform to meet these commitments of equality, inclusion, and meaningful leadership and participation, particularly when it comes to the involvement of civil society and women-led peace-building networks, not just state and military institutions, which can become a norm if we don't unpack and humanize climate security in the context of human security and the human rights agenda. So having the multi-year funding from DFAT to support our Pacific Island Women Mediators Network means we're able to really plan and look at what is happening through the Mediators Network from the local to the regional and global, including looking at the intersectionality and the interweave in our movement-led approach. Our network members are all Pacific Island women. We come from the lived experience of not just peace building or responding to crises, but also looking at the intersectionality of the climate security agenda in the context of nuclear justice in the Northern Pacific, the ongoing quest for self-determination and decolonization. And what does that mean for Indigenous Pacific Island women to have oversight on issues to do with climate security, as well as, of course, addressing the root causes of gender-based violence, sexual coercion, and the lack of bodily autonomy, economic and other structural violence, including recovering from military coups and armed conflict. And all of this on top of being on the front line of the climate and ecological crises. So as we do this, we honor and build on the legacy of our women-led peace building and activism. As reminded by a co-founder of our network, Nolene Nambulivo, at last week's inaugural colloquium of our network, Pacific Island women peace builders examine the individual, the communal, and the liminal, protecting ourselves as manifestations of the ecosystem of which we're an integral part of. Soil, the air, the ocean, the river, and mountains. We don't just sit outside of the ecosystem, but we see that notion as a false separation that brings conflict, waste, and war, including extractivism and ecocide. Many Pacific feminist peace builders know that there's never been a separation between humans and Vanua or Whanua. For example, the Whanganui River on the west coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand, is now protected as a living being. We're reminded by climate and nuclear justice campaigner Danity Loken of the Marshall Islands, also a member of our network, of the importance of reclaiming traditional concepts, our custom, such as the concept of Lachmanjuri in the Marshall Islands, which represents women as traditional peacemakers and decision makers in their communities. So together we're moving a feminist approach to climate justice across movements, which are helping us actually, as Pacific Island women, recognize the need to dismantle systems, to promote women's leadership, and as we say, destroy the patriarchy, not the planet. So as we're taking down these old harmful systems, we're building a world anew. We're working hard as truth tellers, healers, regenerators of life, agroecologists, working in and for beloved community, and bringing a frame of human security, justice, peace building, and conflict transformation. We're working together to determine how Pacific Island women-led mediation can work across movements for climate justice and the struggle for self-determination, including in the co-creation of content such as a new Pacific Gender Peace and Development Certificate course. Now, working across movements is critical because it's an opportunity to actually co-create feminist solutions for more impactful climate justice financing as a peace-building tool. The funds we have nurtured the work to change societies and governments, even as they deal with the onslaught of loss and damage. Our climate security, in a sense, I want to take you back to 2015, when we were facing the impact of Category 5 TCPAM, and where we started the work to lobby for the inclusion of climate change in the UN Security Council agenda. And we have that language now in UNSCR 2242. We meant at that time, and we continue to mean, an inclusive, transformative peace that shifts from traditional and hard security notions of peace and security to a peace-building approach that recognizes that the protracted water crisis in small island states such as Kiribati and Tuvalu and the Northern Pacific are drivers of conflicts in families, perpetuating and exacerbating gender-based inequalities, including the burden of unpaid care work for women. A Pacific Island feminist approach to climate security and climate justice also means supporting women in their struggle for peaceful transitions to self-determination in Papua, Kanaki, Mahoi Nui, and Bougainville, and ensuring the diversity of our movement, the strands of work, have equitable access to resources to enable them to contribute their innovation, perspectives, energy, and creativity. So the one thing that we can do, that we're seeing and we're able to do now, is to move the money directly in partnership with feminist funders to finance the struggle. So decolonizing the work on how gender just funding can look like and how that can also reach women peace builders, mediators, and community leaders. So it's not just about getting funds to INGOs for convenience, it's actually about making sure that the institutions within the Pacific Island regions, our networks, can get the resources. It also means moving the money towards peace building and addressing and tackling the global military spending. So we meet together on the mat known as the Pacific Island Feminist Alliance for Climate Justice. We're weaving together the strands of work for gender justice and climate justice across these movements for self-determination, decolonization, young women's activism, climate and gender justice, SRHR and SOGIESC activism, as well as Pacific Island women-led peace building. The resultant dense and rich mat is a beautiful, unique, and useful map beyond measure. We're reweaving local, national, regional, and global political processes to ensure that a decolonized, demilitarized, and denuclearized agenda informs a peace and security architecture that is a vibrant ecosystem for peace builders and civil society in our Pacific. It includes our faith and traditional leaders, indigenous leaders of all genders, to work in the prevention of the resurgence of fascism, patriarchal violence, and conflict, and guiding security sector governance reform to be more accountable to human security. We're not just on standby as the Pacific Women Mediators Network, but doing the work to ensure there's institutional reform. And that was the basis of our call to the Pacific Forum Leaders meeting last year. Our call for them to develop and adopt a dedicated peace-building declaration to complement other political declarations such as BOE and Bikatawa. In line with the peace and security pillar of the Blue Pacific strategy, we envision the Ocean of Peace Declaration to be the basis of a regional peace-building architecture to support national and local infrastructures of peace that enable small island developing states, governments, development institutions, and civil society to strengthen national peace, human security, and development nexus approaches through strong, coherent, and well-resourced national and localized platforms to progress accountability, the accountability to the commitments that they have made to gender justice, women, peace, and security. So for us, the Ocean of Peace Declaration must respond to our call of more than 20 years to redesign the table and to weave, bringing together the strands of diversity of women peace builders, including our network, to participate in political processes at all levels, enhancing interlinkages to the pillars of participation, protection, prevention, relief, and recovery, connecting with peace building, climate change, DRR, and humanitarian action, and supported by feminist, decolonized, flexible, and sustainable, programmatic, focused, and funding, whether it's for government, intergovernmental organizations, women-led movements, and civil society working for peace. Thanks, Norrell.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for highlighting the very strategic feminist nexus, intersectional approaches and linking the climate emergency with peace building and peace and security. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences from the Pacific. I'm pleased to invite our final speaker. We are a bit behind time, and we are looking at the questions in the chat, and we'll respond to them as much as we can through the Q&A portal. But I want to invite our final speaker, Lucas. Lucas, thank you for joining us so early from Berlin. But based on Adelphi's work around the world, what are some of the key insights for conducting climate-informed risk analysis that is gender sensitive? Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Very warm welcome from my side as well. I'm very happy to be here and be able to contribute to this important event. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see it. Yeah, I will give a short input for our discussion on how to assess climate-related security risks, which we heard is a really important first step for integration later on. And I will focus on a methodology that we have developed as part of our flagship Weathering Risk initiative. So that is an initiative where we develop tools to better understand climate-related security risks and help integrate that. And it was launched in 2019 at the Berlin Climate and Security Conference. You can see some of the partners here on the screen. This methodology is really based on our extensive experience in developing similar assessment approaches and distilling the incredible knowledge and research that has been developing in the past 15 years on the topic of climate change and security. And it has been tested in a range of different contexts, from Africa to the Pacific to Latin America over the past 6 years. And we now have the second iteration of the methodology. And that methodology really allows you to identify and understand current and future climate-related security risks, and then based on that, identify possible entry points and response measures that link climate change adaptation, peace building, and inclusion, and then also help you with implementation, especially, for example, on monitoring and evaluation. So how can you then measure results across these different dimensions? And one important feature is that it builds on existing approaches, for example, on existing peace and conflict assessments, conflict sensitivity assessments, climate vulnerability assessments. So it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, and people who have experiences with these different methodologies can build on that and then just add different parts. So it's a very modular approach. And just very quickly, this graphic shows you the different elements of a good climate security analysis, and it's also the basic framework we are using. And on the one hand, we're trying to understand climate and environmental stresses within a certain context. So we're trying to understand the impacts of climate change, quick onset impacts such as storms and floods, slow onset impacts, temperature rise, sea level rise. But we are also looking beyond climate change at other environmental stresses, pollution, mining. So we're not including anything from this analysis. And then we're looking at the main peace and security risks. So we're trying to understand what are the actors and dynamics of conflicts? What are the different kinds of conflicts and violence that are present? And again, we're covering here a very broad spectrum from violent conflict to gender-based violence and political instability. And then we're looking at how do those both interact? So how does climate change interact with peace and security risks? And we do that along what we call climate security risk pathways that link specific climate impacts with different kinds of insecurity and conflict. And the methodology provides you with some prototypical pathways that you can start working on. So for example, conflicts around natural resource management, migration, disaster, or how climate-induced livelihood insecurity can contribute to the recruitment into non-state armed groups. And this analysis also takes into account important context factors that have been shown to play an important role in these dynamics, as they both shape risks and resilience. And in particular, gender and intersectionality is central here. And that brings me to the next slide. That's kind of our research approach. And that's a really unique feature of the methodology. And it's a combination of quantitative data, especially on the climate side, with qualitative, locally grounded research. So those kind of assessments normally involve a significant amount of field research, individual interviews, focus group discussions, and we always closely work with local partners and experts that know the context very well to do this. And that allows us then to really identify context-specific solutions. And that's important because climate security dynamics and conflicts often differ widely, of course, between countries, but also within countries. So, for example, I'm currently working on an assessment for Papua New Guinea, and natural resource management conflicts are really prevalent across the country, but play out quite differently, for example, in the highlands compared to small islands and atolls. But even within the highlands, the specific dynamics really change drastically between different communities and geographies. So, for example, between rural areas and peri-urban areas. What is also central to it is that it's gender sensitive and an intersectional research approach where you put a lot of focus on understanding how risks and resilience differ across gender, age, sexual orientation, identity groups. For example, what role these factors play in situations of displacement, when people move and how they move, and also how it, for example, impacts the recruitment into armed groups. And this involves a lot of effort to capture the voices and perspectives of marginalized groups that are normally harder to reach. And those include, of course, women, but also people with disabilities and youth. And the guidance, the methodology involves a lot of guidance on how to do this. And again, this makes sure that the entry points that we identify based on this are relevant to address the needs of those groups. And then lastly, it's a very collaborative approach that involves relevant stakeholders in all parts of the process. And give two quick examples. One is an assessment that we did in Haiti, where we worked with a climate security working group that brought together UN agencies, international organizations, the Haitian government, and civil society organizations. And those institutions and the working group was very closely involved in the process of co-developing the assessment, from the methodology to data collection to the analysis. We also developed an assessment for the Pacific. So we did a regional analysis and developed a regional assessment framework based on that. So we adapted the general assessment framework to this Pacific, and we worked very closely with IOM and UNDP, and we had multiple round tables bringing together a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including civil society, did consultations in Kiribati, Tuvalu, and RMI, and then worked very closely with the Pacific Islands Forum that then also endorsed this methodology to be used across the Pacific. We're also currently working on assessments for Papua New Guinea and Sri Lanka, and I can dig a bit deeper into that if there is interest. Just lastly, very quickly, some of the lessons learned. The collaborative approach is really key. So we put a lot of effort in trying to get as many stakeholders involved in the setup of the methodology and the scope, the research itself, and then key parts of the analysis. And that really allows us to make sure that the solutions we identify are relevant, and that the locally grounded research makes sure it is also context specific. We've also learned that this research can be a really effective tool to build capacity and raise awareness. So it's the stakeholders that are involved in that process also learn how to use this methodology. And then what we also saw is that it's not enough to just analyze the context. Follow-up support is also key to translate analysis into action. So to support actors then to identify solutions, to develop theories of change, develop M&E frameworks to do that. And with that, I would like to thank you. If you want to have more information on that, you can find it on our website, where you can also download the methodology. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I think that this is really one of the more effective methodologies that have been used all around the world in assessing the linkages or the impact of climate change on existing vulnerabilities, particularly in crisis context. So thank you so much for those insights. Now, we have received a lot of requests for the slides, so they will be made available on the webpage for this event. So please do go and visit that webpage, and there will be other material there as well. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but there is one question for Sharon. Sharon, if you are still there, and I think you're still there, a quick response to a question for you. What are your network's upcoming priorities to address the climate peace building nexus?
I mean, that's really ongoing. It's the priorities that started, like I said, I mean, really 2015 was catalytic when we were hit by TCPAM, not just in Vanuatu, and getting the language into UNSCR 2242. We work in collaboration. As I said, a number of our Pacific Women Mediators Network members are part of a movement-led committee known as the Pacific Island Feminist Alliance for Climate Justice. At the end of April, we had a large conference in Fiji, a large feminist conference in Fiji that focused on Pacific feminists defending the living planet. And right now we have several grants that are going out across the Pacific Island region, from the Northern Marianas to Marshall Islands to Kiribati, and then into Fiji and Vanuatu, to be able to help women who participated in the conference to really localize the outcomes and help build the agenda around what is the feminist climate justice agenda. We've been made more mindful of the nexus between demilitarization and climate justice. And so we want to make sure that that is well addressed and well noted in the climate security agenda, to bring women peace builders to the table with the more traditional security sector. But at the Pacific Island Forum level, now that we have the Blue Pacific strategy, now that we have the pillar on peace and security, there's now that opportunity to really make the linkages between the climate and DRR pillar of the Blue Pacific strategy with peace and security. And the infrastructures for peace that we were talking about last week at our colloquium in Solomon Islands really is about, for small island states, bringing that peace and security mechanism together within national bureaucracies, if you want, so that everybody can really make sure that everybody is around the table, not just traditional security or governments, foreign affairs, etc., but also civil society, and more importantly, women and youth peace builders. And one last thing, Nurul, I think really struck me last week, and as you know, I tried to communicate today, was we need to go back and reclaim our Pacific Island tradition, customs, and systems of peace building and climate adaptation. This is something that younger people are talking about more and more. So how do we weave all of these strands into this beautiful mat that we are weaving together from across movements? So I'm quite excited about the next piece of work, particularly as we bring younger women together next month here in Suva. Thanks, Nurul.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Indeed, exciting times ahead for the women peace builders in the Pacific. We look forward to all your efforts in the coming months. So with that, we are concluding this launch, and I hope that everyone who has tuned in are able to get the information that they came here for. But if you would need more information, please do go to our website, the Asia Pacific Regional Office, as well as the website on this particular event. On your screen, you will have the QR code that will take you to the guidance note. Please download and go through the guidance note. So on behalf of UN Women, thank you so much to our speakers and to everyone who tune in from around the world. Our call to action today and every day is to encourage member states to localize the women, peace and security agenda, including through developing national action plans on women, peace and security, and to integrate climate risk into every national action plan to ensure parity for women's leadership in key decision-making spaces, and to invest in inclusive solutions that will bring us lasting peace and security for all in this region and beyond. So thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.